you all so much for coming. Really appreciate it. So I guess we'll just kick off with some introductions. And apologies. The clicker doesn't work. So if you see Adam doing any weird shape movements, you're the one doing the thing. Yeah. There we go. Hello. There we go. We got some introductions. All right. So I'm Husban Siddiqi. I'm an independent games developer, founder of Huscrafts. I'm currently working on my debut game, Rogue Eclipse, and thank you. Thanks to the support of the kind folks at Outersloth. And yeah, I guess I'll throw it over to Adam to introduce himself with his debut game.
Hello, I'm Adam. I've been working in games for about 10 years, but this Loco Motive is my debut game. Previously, I shipped, thank you. Previously, I shipped games such as Starbound, Wargroove. I've worked on the Kingdom series, and back in 2020, it all sort of started with a game jam.
Adam, if I'm not mistaken, we have just crossed over the 1-year anniversary of Loco Motive as well.
That's true.
Please give him a round of applause for that. Right. So that doesn't work. Oh, there we go. So before we start, could I get a show of hands of how many folks have either heard of Loco Motive or played it or seen it before this panel?
Okay, that's enough people. We don't have to worry. But yeah, Loco Motive is a murder mystery comedy adventure set on a steam train. And you play as 3 characters who are all accused of the murder of Lady Unterwald. And throughout the game, each character sort of tells their tale of what happened that evening until it culminates satisfyingly, I hope, in the end, yeah.
So I think that takes us nicely to the origins. So when did you start thinking about it, and kind of what was the kernel of when Loco Motive?
So I don't know if everyone knows this, but I made this game with my brother Joseph, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. He's in Portugal, in much nicer weather, I'm sure. But we'd always wanted to work on a project together, but we never quite managed to make it happen. I was already working in games, and he was studying games and learning how to do it sort of academically. So he was learning all the different tools, and he ended up leaning more towards the programming side, and I was much more on the art side. So I felt like if we were to work together, we could complement each other's skills and abilities and make something together. And so I just sort of randomly came upon it, a tool called PowerQuest. You may know is created by an Australian developer called Dave Lloyd. He sort of worked on Crawl, and he recently put out his own adventure game called The Drifter. So through the tool that he was creating, he'd made a bunch of game jams, and he'd done all these games in a couple of weeks, maybe 2 weeks. And I played a bunch of them, and I was just so impressed, really. I was just so impressed by the quality of them. And I thought, if he can make this in 2 weeks, then maybe this is what we need to do. And so I reached out to my brother and I said, let's try and make something with this tool. And we were tinkering around with it a bit, and we did ultimately mess around with some ideas, but nothing really came of it. And then when it got to 2020, AdventureX sadly was cancelled that year due to the lockdown and pandemic, and they decided to do a game jam instead. And I saw that as a real opportunity to take some time off and convince Joseph to work on a little game jam with me. I think, you got it up already.
Ahead of the game, it's great.
Yeah.
Because I can see the next slide, I'm trying to track when you're like...
Don't give away the magic.
So yeah, Joseph was on board, and we had a lot of enthusiasm for an idea, and we pursued it. Yeah.
And was there anything that tool in particular helped you in terms of being able to construct the game jam or anything like that? Like, what was it about it that specifically you're like, oh yeah, like we can use this to build the
tool?
Yeah,
Tool?
yeah.
Just because I'd seen the results of it basically, and Joseph was very familiar with coding and Unity, and that's my weakness. I'm not very good on the technical side at all. And so I thought, oh, it's like a wrapper for Unity, essentially, built for making adventure games. And so I thought this is the perfect thing we can use. And that's ultimately what we did with the game jam.
So, why a train, Adam?
Oh, it's partly I just had the idea at the time, and also I thought for a game jam, you don't have a lot of time. And I thought if I can make one train carriage, then I can essentially redraw the train carriage multiple times, and then we'll have tons of content in a very short amount of time. So it was sort of a mix of inspiration and efficiency.
Pragmatism, you might say.
Pragmatism, that's a good word, And so, 2 weeks later, we essentially had a working video game. It was about an hour long. I thought it was going to be 15 minutes. But it ended up being way longer than I expected it to be, which ended up becoming a theme. What
was the play times you said some people had playing in the game jam, like the game jam version?
Over an hour. I don't know how. I saw someone take 2 hours to play it.
So you have 2 weeks, as you said. What was the approach? Were there any major, like, how would you, I can't even imagine, having those level of constraints and then having to not only figure out, the story and narrative, but to also be weaving that in with puzzles or, problems to be solving, right? So what was your approach in terms of the game jam side of things?
You're not coming through.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I was just talking closer to the microphone. I was just asking, what the approach was for the 2-week constraint for the game jam.
Well, we weren't really making it for anyone at the time other than ourselves. We didn't really think anyone would play it. So it was kind of freeing in a way. We didn't have to worry too much about what it would end up being. It was more of an exercise for us. But I distinctly remember, because we made it pretty much remotely over Discord. So I remember having a Google document open and just trying to write out things that both made us laugh, and if I could make him laugh or if he could make me laugh, we sort of make a note and be like, okay, well that has to be in there. And that's sort of, we did that enough times that we could kind of build a beginning, middle, and end essentially. And when it's an hour long, you don't have to worry too much, because you can kind of start and end the story in a relatively short amount of time, and you don't have to keep putting in all these leads that then you get hours later.
No, that's because from a more personal standpoint, right? It's I think even constructing something at the scale can, especially when you're approaching it for your first time, it can always be quite unwieldy and more intricate than expected. So I appreciate that insight. I guess that would dovetail nicely though into, so you've completed it. Before you saw the reception, how were you feeling about it when you completed it?
Mostly tired. I remember feeling very almost jet lagged at the end of it, because there was a real push right at the end, the last couple days to finish it, to make sure that we could submit it on time and everything. And so after it had come out, I just slept for about 14 hours, I think. So that was my initial response to it. But then afterwards, I saw that there was a lot of people leaving reviews on the itch page, and sort of the response was much bigger and much more. I don't know. It was unexpected, but it was, everyone was saying really nice things, and they were like, "We want more of this. You need to make a whole thing of it, essentially."
And then on top of that, I believe there was press as well, right? Press coverage that got.
It was when we started getting actual press that I realized, oh well, maybe we should take this seriously, and maybe there's something here, and combined with this really nice article that was written on PC Gamer, I started getting publishers emailing me Like, what are you doing with this? And I was like, okay, well, that never happens. So maybe there's something here. And so that's when I started thinking, oh, well, what we could do is we could take the game jam and spend 6 months or 8 months or however long polishing it, maybe adding a little bit extra content, and then release it as like a full finished thing.
Why
Is my naivety coming
No,
true?
no, no. I was going to say, what year was that bought in?
I don't want to talk about it.
Seldom, I think, many developers start off on a journey of making something of their own creation, and then, I mean, even through my own discoveries, just how unwieldy games get. It's, yeah, in a strange way, you don't realize like how like even if you try to scope something right, it just sometimes.
There are some people that can do that, but they are mutants.
I haven't met them. I wouldn't know. Yeah. So I guess that takes us nicely to the full game.
Wow, that's a great segue.
Thank you. I try. So you've got publishers reaching out. Just out of curiosity, how many folks in here are planning on are planning on pitching their game to a publisher, or are planning on pitching anything? Just get an idea. Okay. All right. So I guess that takes us nicely to, you've got the publishers messaging you, but for those unfamiliar, it's not just a straightforward process like, oh, like they're in the DMs and then you're off to the races, right? Like you actually have to think about.
Even if they like it, like the timing might not match up for them, or they might have like 6 games coming out in the next 2 years, and your game doesn't fit into that slot. So like it's a long process. Even if they like it, it can take months for anything to come to fruition on that.
And were there any major differences or changes between the game jam and what you ended up pitching?
I talked about like what my initial ambition was for the project, which was to polish the game jam essentially, maybe add some voice acting and some localization, add a few things that we didn't get time to do. But then when we started talking to publishers, they were like, well, no, this should be like a feature length thing. Come back and pitch something bigger. And so I'll come back next week and pitch something bigger. So I had a week to rethink it. And this is when I came up with the concept of the 3 playable characters. Because in the game jam, you only play as Arthur Ackerman. And the story starts and resolves itself pretty rapidly. And so I thought, how can I sort of extend this without people getting extremely bored, like 7 hours into being on a train? And I thought, well, you have the 3 characters and they can tell their own perspectives of that evening, and you can refresh it by changing the character positions on the train, and maybe it's a different time of day, maybe you have access to different areas of the train, and maybe their version of events contradicts in some ways the events of the other characters. And so when I pitched that, it kind of started to come into fruition. And so, yeah, so I ended up working with Chucklefish in the end, and they liked that idea, and we actually signed with them really quickly. So I think so the game jam came out sort of, when was it? End of 2021?
I think it might have been before then.
Maybe October, November 2020.
Yes.
And then and then I signed a publishing contract like 4 or 5 months later. And so it was kind of off to the races then. And I signed it based only on the game jam. So I didn't have any prototype or anything. It was just the game jam. And so I think when it came time to start making the full game, then it was like, okay, well like laying the tracks almost as we're making it.
And I guess another question is because, to have those 3 characters, and it had to just surely be beyond that, right? Like before it was signed, did you have an idea of where the story was going to end up? Did you have an idea where mechanically you were going to end on? Because I almost feel like one of the trickier things is having to navigate, because, there's always that novelty at the excitement at the start, right? And that's right when players are open and receptive, right, to seeing where an experience can take them. But I almost feel like the difficulty is having a satisfying payoff at the end. So how much I guess what I'm asking is, how much did you know about these characters? How did you land on them? And did you know where their journeys were going to go, considering they weren't even the game jam?
Well, in the game jam, obviously, we had Arthur Ackerman, who's the lawyer, the estate attorney for Lady Untervord, and he loves bureaucracy and paperwork. He pretty much remained unchanged from the game jam. Herman Merman essentially remained unchanged, other than in the game jam he dies. And so I was like, well, I like that character too much. Like, I want to keep him for the main game, and we could do a lot more with him. And it would be such a shame if he just dies and then we can't reuse him. So I was like, no, he's not dying, I'm changing that. And Diana didn't really feature in the game jam. She was sort of a new character. And so I knew a lot about Arthur and Herman, and like a lot of what happens in the game jam we brought into the main game. I mean, you played the game jam.
Yes.
So you can see the elements that we then carried into the main game.
I did. It also took me quite some time to play through it, so
Well,
thanks
I'm
for
sorry.
that.
Also, you're welcome. But yeah, you're asking me whether we had everything planned out. I think it was easy to do like the first section because we had the game jam as reference. But then when it came time to do the middle of the end, we went back to what we kind of did with the game jam, which was we had the Google Doc open sheet. And I was like, well, it's a game on a train. So at some point you need to be on top of the train. You need to have this, and this, and this. And then in between, we would come up with funny situations for the characters. And then we would essentially try and link all those things together. And so it was very much comedy first. And then we would tie the puzzles into that. And it became pretty difficult later on when we were thinking about cutting stuff. Because if you take a puzzle out, you're also taking out chunks of the story. So that was something we learned much later. Like, oh, that's actually really hard to do. And there were a few times we changed puzzles at the last minute because they worked on paper, but then when you're playing through them, they needed like tweaking essentially. So this is essentially how we wrote the game, which is really not the best pipeline, which is like we just wrote it in Google Docs and then put it in the game afterwards. So like if we would do another game, we'll definitely, this is one of the things we'll definitely change. We'll use like a proper tool.
So was it essentially that you kind of, play, so I guess from a process standpoint, overlapping between, because you said the game jam, right, was just kind of seeing, whether or not like you could make, whether or not you or Joseph could make each other laugh, right?
Yeah.
How much of that was part of the process how much of it was just fooling around until like you had deadlines to meet?
Well, I don't want to call it fooling around, but yeah, there's a lot of like doing bits and then getting distracted by the bits and then be like, no, we have to like write this down. So there's a lot of that, and like that was some of the most fun I had on the project, like just kind of riffing off him and him going in the document and changing stuff, or he comes in and has a scene written out, and then I go in and make some changes and tweaks, and then he does his tweaks. And it was a really nice way of working. I think it really helps to have someone that you can bounce ideas off like that. If I was doing this myself, I think it would have been really hard, because I think you always need someone that you can bounce those ideas off of, especially when you're writing comedy. But it's lucky that like he has a very similar like sense of humor as me, and so like I just sort of wrote it for him basically.
So then at that point you've got so you've got your script and you've got your characters and all that. So then I guess that brings us into like the puzzle design and the gameplay. So like what was the approach there for figuring it out?
Yeah, so we didn't do the puzzles in Google Docs. We actually used the real tool. We used YED, which I think was another tool recommended by Dave Lloyd. And it's essentially a puzzle dependency chart. And Ron Gilbert has a whole blog about doing these for his previous games. And so I essentially was like, oh, that's pretty good. He seems to know what he's talking about. And so essentially you have the puzzles and they sort of interlink into each other. And this is how we designed everything. And this is kind of what I was saying earlier about how like it works in the flowchart, but then it also has to work when you're actually playing it. And so this is more of a reference point. And then we would tweak it and tweak it and tweak it once we were actually able to play the puzzles.
And were there any major challenges or anything like that you experienced or during the process when you were, because I feel like I mean, there's another system that it ties very nicely into because, like, you even wove it into the narrative. But like, one of the things as a part of your pitch, right, was having a more cleverly integrated hint system, right? The helpline.
Yeah.
So how did you figure that part out? Because obviously, you know, sometimes when you're wanting to have something to be a bit more approachable, right? You want to give players that guidance. But I guess what I'm asking is, where did the helpline come from? And then the second thing was, how did you figure out which puzzles ultimately need to be weaved into that?
I think all of the puzzles are weaved into the helpline. We didn't sort of pick and choose like, oh, we think this one people will get stuck on. But we were very smart and left all the hintline stuff to the very end. So like, if we changed a puzzle, then you didn't have redundant lines or anything like that.
And then when it came to, and I mean, did that cause any headaches from a narrative standpoint or like production standpoint in terms of I mean, with the number of puzzles in the game, right? You would have, if there's just for context in the game, there is a helpline in there, and it's got a lot of good jokes, and it's good fun. But that all had to be voice recorded, didn't it? So like, did that cause any?
I realized afterwards that people don't do that for a reason. Because once you have all the hints voiced, you can't change them. But luckily, we avoided any issues with that for the most part. But yeah, I think in Return to Monkey Island, it's a book in your inventory, and you can open it, and it's kind of does the same job, but without voice acting, which is probably a lesson I'll take for next time.
Well, I think that moves us on nicely, because what I was going to ask was, well, one, we've hit as I've mentioned earlier, the 1 year anniversary of the game, as well as the anniversary of the game jam. So I guess now that you and Joseph have this under your belt, like, what learnings do you have from this, and what do you think you'll be applying going forward into any future projects that you'll be doing in game development?
Sort of like a lessons learned sort of situation.
Exactly.
I think I realized that my weaknesses are sort of pacing and estimating how long things will take for a player. Like, I think when we pitched the game, we thought it'd be 5 to 7 hours long, and it ended up being like twice that. And so there's always this thing in the back of my mind was, oh, we could have just made it like half as long and it would have been fine. But then maybe it wouldn't be the same game. And I also think because we came into it very early with this idea of you play as 3 characters and you play through all of their events, and then we did this silly thing where you play as Arthur's storyline, and then Herman's storyline takes place before. So it's also a completely non-linear telling of events. So we had to make sure that everything lined up. And so you got stuff like you're encountering at the beginning of the game that you don't see the setup for when you play as Herman. So it was very overcomplicated. And so it was very hard to tell whether that was actually going to work until right at the end. Like, a lot of games, they come together in the final like couple weeks or months. And that was one of the things I was most worried about, like Act 2, because it was set before everything. Act 1 is fine, because you're setting up all the, you're setting up all these issues, and you're like, I'll fix it, and it'll come back in Act 2 and Act 3. So like, that's definitely something I'll work on if we do another project like this.
Perfect. No, thank you. I think that really covers everything. I guess we technically have a bit of time, right?
How much time do we
No,
have?
you're actually just over.
Okay.
It's because of the gap between.
Do we have time for any questions?
A couple of quick questions. Excuse
You do
me.
one.
I was going to say, if anyone has
What do you
questions,
have?
Like, does anyone have a question?
or does anyone have any questions?
Does
I think they want to go to lunch.
does anybody have any questions, or do you want to go and play games? Sure. Yeah.
I think we get.
Are there any questions? In that case, I should say
Thank you so much.
to Husban.